The stagecoach rattled into Bisbee, Arizona on a scorching afternoon in July of 1882, carrying a woman who looked like she had already died but forgotten to stop breathing. Sarah Sutton pressed her face against the dusty window, her green eyes hollow as the abandoned mine shafts that dotted the surrounding mountains, watching the copper mining town materialize through waves of desert heat like a mirage she did not want to reach. Her black mourning dress clung to her thin frame, and her auburn hair, once carefully pinned, had come loose in wisps that stuck to her damp neck. She was 23 years old and felt ancient. Every breath an effort, every heartbeat a reminder that she was still alive when everyone she loved was not. The stage lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, dust billowing around the wheels in choking clouds. Sarah waited until the other passengers had departed before she gathered her single carpet bag and stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk. The heat hit her like a physical force, but she barely noticed. She had stopped noticing most things 3 months ago when the fever had swept through her family's farm in Kansas, taking her mother first, then her father 2 days later, and finally her younger sister Emma on a rain-soaked morning that Sarah could not stop replaying in her mind. She had nowhere else to go, but here to Bisbee, where a distant cousin she had never met supposedly ran a boarding house. The letter of invitation had arrived a week after she had buried Emma in the small cemetery behind the Methodist church, written in careful script by a woman named Margaret who had heard about the tragedy from another cousin back east. "Come to Arizona," Margaret had written. "Start fresh where nobody knows your sorrow." But Sarah carried her sorrow like a second skin, impossible to shed. She walked slowly down Main Street, past the saloons already filling with miners finishing their shifts, past the general store and the assay office, past men who tipped their hats, and women who glanced at her mourning clothes with sympathy she did not want. The boarding house stood at the end of the street, a 2-story structure painted white with a wide porch where several rocking chairs sat empty in the afternoon heat. Margaret answered the door on the second knock, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. She took one look at Sarah and pulled her into an embrace that Sarah endured but could not return. Her body had forgotten how to accept comfort. "You poor dear," Margaret said, ushering her inside where the rooms were cooler, shaded by heavy curtains. "I have a room ready for you upstairs. You must be exhausted from the journey." Sarah nodded because it seemed expected. Though exhaustion was such a constant state, she no longer distinguished it from simply existing. Margaret led her up narrow stairs to a small room with a brass bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the rocky hills beyond town. It was clean and plain, and Sarah felt nothing about it at all. "I will bring you some supper later," Margaret said. "Rest now. We can talk tomorrow about you helping with the housework if you are feeling up to it. Nothing too strenuous, just something to keep you occupied." After Margaret left, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her hands. They were thin, the bones too prominent, the nails bitten down during the long nights of nursing the dying. She had failed them all. That was the thought that circled her mind constantly, wearing grooves in her consciousness like water on stone. She had tried so hard to save them, had followed every instruction from the doctor, had prayed until her knees ached and her voice went hoarse. But they had died anyway, one by one, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly made no sense. She lay back on the bed without undressing and closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. It rarely did anymore. Instead, she saw her mother's face, pale and drawn in the final moments, saw Emma reaching for her hand and whispering, "Do not leave me," even as death pulled her away. Sarah had not left. She had stayed until the end, and then she had kept staying, trapped in that farmhouse with ghosts until Margaret's letter had given her an excuse to run. The days in Bisbee began to blur together in a haze of meaningless activity. Sarah helped Margaret with the housework, scrubbing floors and washing linens and preparing meals for the boarders who came and went. Most were miners, rough men who worked in the copper shafts and came home covered in red dust, too tired for conversation. Sarah preferred it that way. She moved through the boarding house like a ghost herself, speaking only when necessary, eating barely enough to sustain her thin frame, sleeping in fragments filled with dreams of Kansas and fever, and graves dug in hard earth. Margaret worried. Sarah could see it in the way the older woman watched her, but she did not press. For that, Sarah was grateful. She could not bear to put her grief into words, could not explain the vast emptiness that had opened inside her chest, swallowing everything that had once been Sarah Sutton until only a shell remained. 3 weeks after her arrival, Margaret asked her to take a basket of mending to the Navarro ranch 5 miles outside of town. One of the boarders, a ranch hand named Tom, had torn several shirts and work pants that needed proper attention, and Margaret's rheumatism was acting up in the heat. Benjamin Navarro runs the place, Margaret explained as she packed the mended clothes into a wicker basket. Good man, fair employer. His wife died in childbirth 2 years ago, the baby too. He has been alone out there since, just him and his hired men and more cattle than sense. He brings the ranch hands into town every few weeks for supplies and a hot meal here. Sarah took the basket without comment. A 5-mile walk in the desert heat did not concern her. Physical discomfort was easier to bear than the weight of her thoughts. She set out early the next morning before the sun reached its peak, wearing a wide-brimmed hat Margaret had lent her, and carrying a canteen of water. The road to the Navarro ranch was really just a wagon track, winding through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The landscape was harsh and beautiful in a way Sarah could intellectually appreciate but not feel. Mountains rose in the distance, their slopes stripped bare by mining operations, and the sky stretched overhead in a dome of relentless blue. The walk took her nearly 2 hours. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was high and merciless, and sweat soaked through her dress. The ranch itself consisted of a low adobe house, a large barn, several corrals holding cattle and horses, and a bunkhouse where the hired men presumably slept. It was well maintained, the fences in good repair, the animals healthy-looking. Sarah approached the main house and knocked on the weathered wooden door. No answer came. She knocked again, louder, then heard voices from behind the barn. Following the sound, she rounded the corner and found 3 men struggling with a young horse in one of the corrals. The animal was rearing and bucking, wild-eyed with fear, while 2 of the men tried to hold a rope attached to its halter. The 3rd man stood in the center of the corral, speaking in low, calm tones that carried across the dusty space. "Easy now, easy," he was saying, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Nobody is going to hurt you. We are just going to get that wire off your leg, and then you can settle down." Sarah could see it now. The barbed wire tangled around the horse's front leg, cutting into the flesh, blood streaking down to the hoof. The horse was panicking, thrashing against the restraint, and the wire was cutting deeper with each movement. The man in the center moved slowly, carefully, his hands outstretched and empty. He was tall and lean, dressed in worn denim and a dark shirt, a battered hat shading his face. There was something about the way he moved, a quiet confidence that seemed to calm the air around him, even as the horse continued to fight. "Tom, Charlie, keep that rope steady but do not pull," he instructed. "Let him tire himself out just a bit more." Sarah stood watching, the basket forgotten in her hands. She should announce her presence, but something kept her silent, transfixed by the scene unfolding before her. The man waited with infinite patience as the horse gradually slowed its struggles, sides heaving, foam flecking its mouth. When the animal finally stood trembling and exhausted, the man approached with slow, measured steps. "That is right, that is good," he murmured. "Let me help you now?" He reached the horse and ran one hand along its neck, still speaking in that low, soothing voice. The horse flinched, but did not bolt. Moving with careful deliberation, the man knelt beside the injured leg and examined the wire. Sarah could see his jaw tighten at the damage, but his hands remained gentle as he began to work the barbed strands free. It took several long minutes. The horse shuddered and whinnied, but held still, as if understanding that this human was trying to help. When the last of the wire came away, the man stood and stepped back, giving the animal space. Blood dripped from the wounds, but they did not look as severe as Sarah had feared. "Charlie, fetch the sow from the barn," the man said. "Tom, you can let that rope loose now. He will be all right." As the other men moved to obey, the man turned and spotted Sarah standing by the fence. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the dusty corral, and Sarah felt something strange, a flicker of something almost like awareness, as if she had been startled out of a deep sleep. He had dark hair curling over his collar, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that were startlingly blue against his tanned face. There were lines at the corners of those eyes, put there by sun and wind, and, she suspected, grief. He looked to be in his late 20s, and there was a steadiness about him that was almost palpable. He climbed over the fence with easy grace and approached her, pulling off his hat. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was the same one that had gentled the frightened horse, low and calm, with an accent she could not quite place. Southern, maybe, but softened by years out west. "I brought mending from Margaret's boarding house," Sarah said, her own voice sounding strange to her ears, rusty from disuse. "For Tom and the others. You walked all the way out here?" He frowned, glancing at the sun. "That is a long way in this heat." I did not mind. He studied her for a moment, those blue eyes taking in her mourning clothes, her thin frame, the careful blankness of her expression. She had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted to reveal. "I am Benjamin Navarro," he said, extending his hand. "This is my ranch." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. "Sarah Sutton." "Thank you for bringing the clothes, Miss Sutton. Tom will be glad to have his shirts back. That man is hard on fabric." He released her hand and gestured toward the house. "Would you like some water before you walk back? Maybe something to eat?" She should refuse. She should take the empty basket and start the long walk back to town. But the sun was brutal, and her canteen was nearly empty, and something about this man's quiet presence made her feel less invisible than she had in months. Water would be appreciated, she heard herself say. Benjamin led her to the adobe house, holding the door open for her to enter. The interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the heat. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, several chairs, and shelves lined with supplies and a few books. It was spare but clean, the home of a man who lived simply and without fuss. He poured water from a clay pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. Sarah drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. When she finished, he refilled the cup without being asked. "You are new to Bisbee," he said, not quite a question. "I arrived 3 weeks ago. I am staying with my cousin Margaret." "Margaret is a good woman. She has helped a lot of people pass through this town." He leaned against the table, arms crossed, watching her with that same careful attention he had given the injured horse. "Where did you come from?" "Kansas." The word came out flat, devoid of emotion. She did not want to talk about Kansas. If Benjamin noticed her reluctance, he did not press. Instead, he said, "I came from Texas originally, near San Antonio. That was a long time ago now. Arizona has a way of getting into your blood." Sarah looked around the simple room, at the signs of a solitary life. "Margaret said you have been alone here for 2 years." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth. It was too personal, too probing, exactly the kind of question she hated when directed at her. But Benjamin did not seem offended. "That is right," he said quietly. "My wife, Elena, died giving birth to our son. He only lived a few hours." He paused, his jaw working as if the words still had sharp edges. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Other days it feels like someone else's life." Sarah found herself looking directly at him, really seeing him for the first time. There was pain in his eyes, old and deep, but there was also something she had not expected. Acceptance. He had survived his tragedy and found a way to keep living, not just enduring, but actually living. "I am sorry for your loss," she said, because it was what people said, though the words always felt inadequate. "And I for yours," he replied. "You are wearing mourning black in July in Arizona. That kind of grief does not come without cause." She stiffened, her defenses rising automatically. "I should go. Thank you for the water." "Wait." He pushed away from the table, moving to block the door not aggressively, but with clear intention. "I am sorry. I did not mean to upset you. It is just that I recognize the look in your eyes. I saw it in my own mirror for a long time." "And what look is that?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "The look of someone who is not sure they want to keep waking up in the morning." The blunt honesty of it stole her breath. She wanted to deny it, to retreat behind the polite facade she showed the world, but she found she could not lie to this man who had lost as much as she had. "My parents and my younger sister," she said, the words emerging haltingly. "Fever took them all within a week. I tried to save them. I tried everything, but they died anyway, and I lived, and I do not understand why." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and terrible. Sarah felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the careful numbness she had built around her heart. She pressed her hands to her face, horrified to feel tears threatening for the first time since the funerals. Benjamin moved closer, his presence solid and calm. "Miss Sutton, Sarah, look at me." She lowered her hands, blinking hard against the burning in her eyes. He was standing perhaps 2 feet away, close enough that she could see the genuine compassion in his expression. "You survived because you were meant to survive," he said firmly. "Not for any grand reason, not because you were stronger or more deserving, just because that is how it happened. And I know it feels like a curse right now, but I promise you, it does not have to stay that way forever." "How?" The word came out broken, desperate. "How do you keep going when everything inside you is dead?" Benjamin reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His touch was warm and grounding, an anchor in the storm of her grief. "You let someone help you. You do not try to carry it all alone." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his sun-browned fingers wrapped around her pale ones. She wanted to pull away, wanted to retreat back into the safe numbness, but she also wanted, with a ferocity that surprised her, to hold on. "I am broken inside," she whispered, her voice trembling with the admission. Benjamin's other hand came up to gently cup her face, tilting it so she had to meet his eyes. They were kind and sad and utterly sincere. "Then we will put you back together." The words settled over her like a promise, like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Sarah felt something shift inside her, the first tiny crack in the wall she had built around her heart. She did not know this man, had met him less than an hour ago, but somehow she believed him. Perhaps it was the understanding in his eyes, the recognition of shared pain. Perhaps it was simply that she was so tired of being alone with her grief. "I do not know if I can be fixed," she said. "You do not have to be fixed," Benjamin replied. "You just have to be willing to heal. There is a difference." Sarah found herself leaning into his touch, craving the human contact she had denied herself for so long. Benjamin seemed to understand. He pulled her gently into his arms, and she went without resistance, pressing her face against his chest as the tears finally came. They were not the wild, hysterical sobs she had expected, but quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks as his arms held her steady. He did not tell her not to cry, did not offer empty platitudes about time, healing all wounds. He simply held her, one hand rubbing slow circles on her back, letting her grieve in a way she had not allowed herself since Kansas. And somehow, in the arms of this stranger who understood loss in ways most people never would, Sarah felt the first glimmer of something that might, eventually, become hope. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah pulled back, embarrassed by her breakdown. "I am sorry. I should not have done that." "Why not?" Benjamin asked. "Grief needs to come out somehow. Better tears than letting it poison you from the inside." She wiped at her face with shaking hands. He retrieved a clean handkerchief from a drawer and handed it to her. As she dabbed at her eyes, she became aware of how intimate the situation had become, alone in his house with a man she barely knew. By all rights, she should be scandalized, but she could not muster the energy to care about propriety. "I really should go back to town," she said, though the prospect of the long walk in the heat was suddenly daunting. "Let me hitch up the wagon and drive you," Benjamin offered. "I need to go into Bisbee anyway for supplies." Sarah wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but practicality won out. "Thank you, that would be kind." While Benjamin went to prepare the wagon, Sarah waited on the porch, trying to compose herself. She felt raw and exposed, as if she had shed a layer of protective skin. But underneath the vulnerability was something else, a strange sense of relief. For the first time since her family's deaths, she had told someone the truth about how she felt, and the world had not ended. Benjamin brought the wagon around, a sturdy vehicle pulled by 2 placid horses. He helped her up onto the bench seat, his hand steadying her as she settled beside him. They rode in comfortable silence for the first mile, the wagon wheels crunching over the rocky ground, the sun beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "Would you like to come back?" Benjamin asked suddenly. "To the ranch, I mean. Not to walk. I would come fetch you. But if you wanted to visit, to talk, I would welcome the company." Sarah turned to look at him. His eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but there was a tension in his shoulders that suggested the offer cost him something to make. She realized with a start that he was lonely too, that he had been isolated with his grief, just as she had been with hers. "I would like that," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Benjamin's shoulders relaxed, and the corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Good. That is good." They continued toward Bisbee, and as they rode, Benjamin began to talk. He told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the Arizona desert, about the hired hands who came and went. He told her about the copper mines that had brought sudden wealth and growth to the territory, about the rough justice of a frontier town, about the beauty of the mountains at sunrise. Sarah listened, content to let his voice wash over her. She did not have much to contribute, her own life feeling small and tragic in comparison. But Benjamin did not seem to mind. He talked easily, filling the silence without demanding she reciprocate. And gradually Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she had not since leaving Kansas. When they reached the boarding house, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Benjamin helped her down from the wagon, and their hands lingered together for just a moment longer than necessary. "I will come by on Saturday," he said. "If that suits you, we could ride out to the canyon, have a picnic maybe. The view is worth seeing." Sarah hesitated. It sounded dangerously close to courting, and she was not ready for that. But then she looked into his eyes and saw only genuine friendship, an offer of companionship without expectation. "Saturday," she agreed. She watched him drive away, the wagon disappearing down the dusty street, and felt something she had not felt in months, a sense of anticipation for the future, however modest. Margaret was waiting inside, trying not to look too curious. "Did you have any trouble finding the ranch?" "No trouble," Sarah replied. "Mr. Navarro drove me back." "Did he now?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. That was kind of him. Sarah could hear the unspoken questions, but she was not ready to examine her own feelings, let alone explain them to her cousin. "I am tired. I think I will rest before supper." In her room, Sarah lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind churning. She kept thinking about Benjamin's words, about healing versus being fixed, about not carrying grief alone. For 3 months she had been trapped in amber, frozen in the moment of her sister's death, unable to move forward or back. But something had shifted today. The amber had cracked just a little, letting in a sliver of light. She thought about Benjamin's face when he spoke of his wife and child, the pain that still lived in his eyes but no longer consumed him entirely. He had survived. He had found a way to live with loss. If he could do it, perhaps she could too. Saturday arrived with a clear sky and temperatures that would climb toward brutal by midday. Benjamin came for her mid-morning, driving the same wagon, but with a basket packed with food and a couple of blankets stowed in the back. Sarah had changed from her morning black into a simple gray dress, the first color she had worn since the funerals. It felt strange and slightly wrong, but Margaret had encouraged it, saying gently that her family would not want her to drown in grief forever. They rode out of town, heading east, where the landscape became more dramatic, carved by ancient rivers into deep gorges and steep cliffs. Benjamin kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the territory. Sarah contributed little, but listened intently, grateful for his easy manner. The canyon he had mentioned was actually a smaller tributary of a larger gorge system, a place where the earth had split open to reveal layers of rust-red and cream-colored stone. Benjamin parked the wagon in the shade of a cluster of cottonwood trees near a trickle of water that would become a torrent during the monsoon season, still a few weeks away. They spread blankets on a flat spot overlooking the canyon and unpacked the food: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a jar of lemonade that had stayed surprisingly cool wrapped in damp cloth. It was more food than Sarah usually ate in a day, but she found herself actually hungry for the first time in recent memory. "Tell me about Kansas," Benjamin said as they ate. "Not the sad parts. Tell me what it was like before." Sarah took a bite of bread, chewing slowly as she considered the question. No one had asked her to remember the good times, only to speak of the tragedy. It felt dangerous to open those memories, but also necessary. "We had a farm about 10 miles outside of Lawrence," she began slowly. "Wheat mostly, and a vegetable garden. My mother kept chickens and always complained they were more trouble than they were worth, but she loved those ridiculous birds. My father was quiet, a hard worker. He used to read to us in the evenings, from the Bible mostly, but also Shakespeare when he could get his hands on it." "And your sister?" Benjamin prompted gently. "Emma," Sarah smiled despite the ache in her chest. "She was 17, full of life and dreams. She wanted to be a teacher, spent all her free time reading whatever books she could borrow. She used to practice her lessons on me, pretending I was a classroom full of children. She would get so serious, so stern, trying to be authoritative. The smile widened. She could never keep a straight face for long. She would start giggling, and then we would both be laughing. She sounds wonderful. She was. Sarah looked out over the canyon, watching a hawk circle lazily in the thermal currents. They all were. It was not an exciting life, but it was good. I was content. "What did you do before?" Benjamin asked. "I helped my mother mostly, cooking, cleaning, sewing. I was decent with a needle. In the summers I would work in the garden. I liked that best, I think, being outside with my hands in the soil. There was something satisfying about planting seeds and watching them grow." They sat in silence for a while, finishing their meal. The canyon stretched before them, vast and ancient, a reminder that human sorrows were small against the scale of geological time. It should have made Sarah feel insignificant, but instead she found it oddly comforting. The earth had endured for millions of years, weathering storms and droughts and floods. Perhaps she could endure too. "My turn," Benjamin said, leaning back on his elbows. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas, youngest of 4 boys. My brothers all stayed to work the family land, but I wanted to see what else was out there. Came to Arizona when I was 21, worked cattle for other men for a few years, saved my money, bought my own spread when I was 25. "How did you meet your wife?" Sarah asked, then immediately regretted the question. "I am sorry. You do not have to answer that." "No, it is all right." Benjamin's expression grew distant, but not pained. "I met Elena in Tombstone before the silver played out. Her father ran a restaurant there. She was beautiful, with dark eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. We courted for 6 months before I worked up the courage to propose. She said yes, and we had a year together before she got pregnant." He paused, picking at the blanket. "She was so happy about the baby. We both were. She wanted a big family, 4 or 5 children at least. We had names picked out, had already started making plans." His voice roughened. "The labor went on too long. Something was wrong. By the time we got the doctor out to the ranch, it was too late for her. He got the baby out, but he was too small, too weak. I held him for the few hours he lived. I named him Michael, after my grandfather." Sarah reached over and took his hand, reversing the comfort he had offered her days before. "I am sorry. That is a terrible loss." "It was," Benjamin agreed. "For a long time I was angry at God, at fate, at Elena for leaving me, at myself for not getting help sooner, for not somehow preventing it. I drank too much, let the ranch fall into disrepair. I was determined to follow them into death, just taking my time about it." "What changed?" Sarah asked. "One of my horses got tangled in wire, tore up his leg badly. I was too drunk to care, figured I would just put him down in the morning. But that night, I sobered up enough to realize the horse was suffering because of my negligence. I went out in the dark, got him free, treated his wounds, sat with him till dawn, and by the time the sun came up, I knew I had a choice. I could keep drowning, or I could choose to live. Really live, not just exist." He looked at Sarah, his blue eyes clear and earnest. "It was not sudden, and it was not easy. But I started putting the ranch back together, started taking care of the animals and the land, and eventually myself. I found that work helped, having something to be responsible for, beyond my own misery. And slowly, piece by piece, I came back to life." Sarah absorbed his words, seeing in his story a possible roadmap for her own recovery. "Do you still miss them?" "Every day," Benjamin said without hesitation. "But the missing is different now. It is softer, more like an old injury that aches when it rains. I can carry it without it crushing me." They sat together in the shade, hands still linked, watching the light change across the canyon walls. Sarah felt something growing between them, a connection forged from shared understanding and mutual loss. It was not romance, not yet, but it was the foundation upon which something deeper could be built. As the afternoon heat intensified, they packed up and headed back toward Bisbee. This time Sarah found herself talking more, sharing small memories of her family, testing her ability to speak of them without breaking. Benjamin listened with the same careful attention he gave everything, never rushing her, never offering false comfort, just being present. When they reached the boarding house, Benjamin helped her down from the wagon. They stood facing each other in the dusty street, neither quite ready to say goodbye. "Would you like to come to supper tomorrow night?" Sarah asked impulsively. "I cook for the boarders sometimes. I could make something special." Benjamin's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "I would like that very much." The next weeks fell into a pattern. Benjamin came to town several times a week, sometimes for supplies, but increasingly just to see Sarah. They would take walks around Bisbee in the early mornings before the heat became unbearable, or sit on the boarding house porch in the evenings after supper, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that felt almost like happiness. Margaret watched their growing friendship with approval, but also caution. "He is a good man," she told Sarah one evening as they washed dishes together, "but you are still grieving. Do not rush into anything you are not ready for." "We are just friends," Sarah protested, though even as she said it, she knew it was becoming more than that. She could not pinpoint exactly when friendship had begun shifting into something deeper. Perhaps it was the day Benjamin brought her a kitten he had found abandoned near the ranch, knowing she needed something to care for. Perhaps it was the evening they sat on the porch during a rare summer rainstorm, watching the lightning paint the sky and not needing to speak. Or perhaps it was the afternoon she had broken down crying while describing her mother's last words, and Benjamin had simply held her, letting her soak his shirt with tears without a word of complaint. Slowly, carefully, Sarah felt herself coming back to life. The numbness that had encased her heart began to thaw. She started eating regular meals again, putting weight back on her thin frame. Her sleep improved, the nightmares becoming less frequent. She found herself laughing at something Benjamin said, and the sound of her own laughter no longer felt like a betrayal of her lost family. The kitten, which she named Copper for its rust-colored fur, helped immensely. Having a small creature dependent on her gave Sarah a reason to get out of bed, a focus beyond her own pain. She found joy in the kitten's antics, in the way it purred when she stroked its soft fur, in its complete trust that she would care for it. Benjamin visited the boarding house one evening in late August to find Sarah in the kitchen, Copper twining around her ankles as she prepared bread dough. She looked up when he entered, flour dusting her cheek, and smiled. It was a real smile, reaching her eyes, and Benjamin felt his heart stutter in his chest. He had been fighting his growing feelings for weeks, telling himself it was too soon, that Sarah needed a friend, not a suitor, that he should not burden her with his affection when she was still healing. But seeing her now, coming back to life like the desert after rain, he could not deny the truth any longer. He was falling in love with her. "You look happy," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I am making bread," Sarah replied, as if that explained everything. "I have not made bread since Kansas. I forgot how much I enjoy it, the way the dough feels under your hands." Benjamin moved closer, watching her knead the pale dough with practiced efficiency. "You are good at it." "My mother taught me." Sarah's expression flickered, pain crossing her features, but then she took a breath and continued working. "She used to say that bread was life made simple. Flour, water, yeast, salt, time. Nothing fancy, just good honest work." She sounds like she was wise. She was. Sarah shaped the dough into a ball and placed it in a bowl to rise, covering it with a clean cloth. She wiped her hands on her apron and finally looked directly at Benjamin. "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" he asked, though his pulse had quickened at her serious tone. "About what you said, that first day at your ranch. About healing, about letting someone help me." She twisted the edge of her apron nervously. "You have helped me, more than you probably realize. For the first time since losing my family, I feel like I might actually survive this. Not just exist, but live, and I want to thank you for that." Benjamin shook his head. "You do not need to thank me. I did not do anything special." "You did, though," Sarah insisted. "You saw me when I was invisible. You understood what I needed even when I could not articulate it myself. You gave me space to grieve, but did not let me drown in it. That is everything, Benjamin." Hearing his name from her lips sent warmth through his chest. She rarely used his given name, usually sticking to the more formal Mr. Navarro, and the intimacy of it now felt significant. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, unsure how to proceed. He had never been skilled with romantic words, had courted Elena through actions more than declarations. But he needed Sarah to understand what she meant to him. "I have something to say as well," he continued, "and you do not have to respond, do not have to say anything at all, but I need you to hear it." He took a breath. "Somewhere between that first day when you arrived at my ranch and now, you have become essential to me. I wake up thinking about when I will see you next. I find myself wanting to share every small thing that happens with you. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me feel alive in a way I have not felt since Elena died." Sarah had gone very still, her green eyes wide, but Benjamin pressed on. "I know it has not been long, I know you are still healing, and the last thing I want to do is pressure you. But I also know that life is short and uncertain, and I do not want to waste time pretending I do not care for you, when I do, deeply." The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the shelf and copper purring at Sarah's feet. Benjamin watched emotions play across her face: surprise, uncertainty, fear, and then finally, something that looked like hope. "I am afraid," Sarah whispered. "I lost everyone I loved. What if I lose you too?" Benjamin crossed the distance between them and took her hands in his. They were still dusted with flour, soft and small in his calloused palms. "You might," he said honestly. "That is the risk of loving anyone. But Sarah, is the alternative better? Living alone, protecting yourself from loss by refusing to connect with anyone? That is not life. That is just a slower kind of death." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she was smiling through them. "When did you become so wise?" "When I met a woman who reminded me that broken things can be mended, that grief does not have to be the end of the story." He raised one of her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking for the chance to court you properly, to see where this might lead. What do you say?" Sarah looked into his blue eyes, seeing reflected there the same cautious hope she felt blooming in her own chest. She thought about her family, about what they would want for her. Emma would have encouraged her to take the chance. Her mother would have approved of Benjamin's steady character. Her father would have appreciated his honesty. "I say yes," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I want to see where this leads." Benjamin's face broke into a smile that transformed his usually serious features, making him look younger, lighter. He pulled her into an embrace, careful and respectful, but warm. Sarah leaned into him, breathing in the scent of horse and leather and sun-warmed cotton that was uniquely his. For the first time since Kansas, she allowed herself to feel the full force of affection for another person, and it did not terrify her as much as she had expected. When they pulled apart, both were grinning somewhat foolishly. Copper meowed, demanding attention, and they laughed. The moment of tension broke into something easier, more natural. Benjamin stayed for supper that night, sitting at the kitchen table while Sarah cooked, telling her stories about a stubborn bull that had led the ranch hands on a merry chase through the mesquite. Margaret joined them, clearly delighted by the obvious connection between her cousin and the rancher. After Benjamin left, heading back to the ranch in the moonlight, Margaret cornered Sarah in the kitchen. "I see the way you look at each other," she said with a knowing smile. "That man is head over heels for you." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It is early days yet?" "Perhaps," Margaret agreed. "But sometimes you just know. I knew with my husband after 3 weeks. We had 40 good years before the pneumonia took him. Not long enough, but I would not trade a single day for a lifetime of safety without him." The words stayed with Sarah as she lay in bed that night, Copper curled against her side, purring softly. She thought about risk and reward, about the courage it took to love when you knew how much loss hurt. Benjamin had that courage, had chosen to open his heart again, despite his own devastating losses. Could she do the same? The answer, she realized, was already yes. She had already started falling for him, had been falling since that first day when he had seen straight through her defenses to the broken woman underneath and had offered not pity, but partnership. He had not tried to fix her or save her. He had simply walked beside her, steady and patient, while she found her own way back to the light. Over the next months, Sarah and Benjamin's courtship deepened. He took her on long rides through the desert, showing her the hidden beauty of the landscape. Secret springs where cottonwoods grew, rock formations carved by wind into fantastic shapes, meadows that exploded with wildflowers after rain. She brought life back to his ranch house, adding curtains she had sewn, a tablecloth, small touches that transformed the stark space into a home. They talked endlessly, sharing their histories, their dreams, their fears. Benjamin told her about growing up in Texas, about his complicated relationship with his father, who had never understood his desire to leave. Sarah told him about her childhood in Kansas, about learning to read on her grandmother's lap, about the time she and Emma had accidentally dyed a prized rooster blue with indigo and her mother's laughter when she discovered the crime. The more they shared, the more connected they became. It was not always easy. There were days when grief would ambush Sarah, leaving her tearful and withdrawn. Benjamin learned to recognize these days, to give her space when she needed it, and comfort when she would accept it. Similarly, Sarah came to understand Benjamin's moods, the shadow that would cross his face when something reminded him of Elena, the guilt he still carried for not saving her. But increasingly, the good days outnumbered the difficult ones. Sarah found herself genuinely happy, excited about the future for the first time in a year. She had not forgotten her family, would never forget them, but she had learned to carry their memory without being crushed by it. They lived on in her heart, in the lessons they had taught her, in the love they had given her. And that love, she realized, could fuel her capacity to love again rather than seal her off from connection. In late October, when the brutal summer heat had finally broken and the Arizona nights grew cool, Benjamin asked Sarah to come out to the ranch for supper. He cooked for her, a skill he had developed during his years alone, and the meal was surprisingly good. Beef stew with vegetables, fresh biscuits, dried apple pie for dessert. After they ate, Benjamin led her outside to the porch. The sky was a riot of stars, the Milky Way a luminous river overhead, so much brighter than anything Sarah had ever seen in Kansas. They sat on the wooden steps, shoulders touching, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "I love you," Benjamin said quietly, his eyes on the stars. "I wanted you to know that. No pressure, no expectations, just the truth." Sarah's breath caught. She had known this moment was coming, had felt her own feelings deepening, but hearing the words made it real. She turned to look at him, at his profile silhouetted against the starlight, at the man who had shown her how to live again. "I love you too," she replied, and the words felt like freedom. "I did not think I could, not after losing everyone. But you showed me that love is not a finite resource. Loving you does not diminish my love for my family. It is just more love, more light in the world." Benjamin turned to her, his smile radiant even in the darkness. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. Sarah kissed him back, pouring into it all the gratitude and affection and hope she felt. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Marry me," Benjamin said. "Not right away if you are not ready, but someday. Say you will be my wife, Sarah. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They held each other under the stars, two people who had been broken by loss, finding wholeness in each other. It was not that Benjamin had fixed Sarah or that she had healed him. Rather, they had both chosen to heal themselves, and in doing so had found each other. Together, they were more than the sum of their individual parts, stronger, braver, more alive. They were married in December, a small ceremony in Bisbee's church with Margaret and the ranch hands and a few townspeople in attendance. Sarah wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Benjamin wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, looking both nervous and elated. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Benjamin kissed her, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness, as if this moment was exactly where she was supposed to be. The reception was held at Margaret's boarding house, with food and music and genuine celebration. Sarah danced with her new husband, laughing as he spun her around the parlor, their friends clapping and cheering. She thought of her family, wished desperately they could be there to share this joy, but she also felt their presence in a way, as if they were watching over her with approval and love. That night, Sarah moved into Benjamin's ranch house, now her home too. They lay together in the bed he had once shared with Elena, and Sarah felt no jealousy, only gratitude that Benjamin had loved before and learned how to love well. He held her tenderly, exploring the newness of intimacy with patience and care, and Sarah gave herself over to the experience, trusting him completely. In the quiet aftermath, wrapped in his arms, Sarah whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Benjamin kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me in." They fell asleep together, two hearts that had been shattered finding harmony in their shared rhythm. The first years of their marriage were good ones, full of hard work and simple pleasures. Sarah threw herself into ranch life, learning to help with the animals, maintaining the garden she had planted behind the house, sewing and cooking and managing the household. Benjamin continued to build the ranch, expanding his herd, hiring additional hands as the operation grew. They worked side by side, partners in every sense. There were challenges, of course. A drought in their second year that nearly bankrupted them, forcing Benjamin to sell off a portion of the herd. A bout of illness that left Sarah bedridden for a week, terrifying Benjamin, who could not bear the thought of losing another wife. Disagreements and misunderstandings that all couples face. But they faced each challenge together, their love deepening with each trial overcome. In the spring of 1884, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The news brought complicated emotions, joy and excitement, but also fear. She thought of Elena, of Benjamin's first wife who had died bringing new life into the world, and terror gripped her heart. Benjamin saw her fear and held her while she cried, while she confessed her worry that history would repeat itself. "I cannot lose you," he said fiercely. "I will get the doctor out here the moment your time comes. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." "You did everything you could for Elena, too," Sarah whispered. "Sometimes trying is not enough." "That is true," Benjamin admitted. "I cannot promise you that nothing will go wrong, but I can promise that I will be here with you every step of the way. And I can promise that you are strong, stronger than you know. You survived losing your entire family. You survived grief that would have destroyed a lesser woman. You can survive this too." His faith in her became her anchor. As the months passed and her belly swelled, Sarah focused on staying healthy and strong. She ate well, rested when she needed to, took walks every evening with Benjamin supporting her arm. They prepared the small bedroom adjacent to their own as a nursery, painting it soft yellow and building a cradle from cedar wood. When Sarah's labor began on a cool January morning in 1885, Benjamin sent one of the hands racing to town for the doctor while he stayed by her side. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the day and into the night. Sarah endured waves of pain that left her gasping and exhausted, while Benjamin held her hand and whispered encouragement, his face drawn with worry. The doctor arrived as night fell, a competent man named Howard who had delivered dozens of babies. He examined Sarah and pronounced her progress good, if slow. "First babies often take their time," he said. "She is doing fine." But as the hours stretched on and Sarah's strength waned, Benjamin felt old fears rising. He could not lose her. He would not survive it a second time. Finally, as dawn painted the sky pink, Sarah gave one final tremendous effort, and their child entered the world with a healthy wail. "A boy," the doctor announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Benjamin felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son, then at Sarah, pale and exhausted, but smiling. "You did it," he said, his voice breaking. "You were so brave." "We did it," Sarah corrected softly. "Together." They named him Thomas Benjamin Navarro, and he was the image of his father with his dark hair and blue eyes. Sarah recovered quickly from the birth, her body strong from years of ranch work, and threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything. Benjamin was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, at the miracle of new life born from love and hope. Watching Benjamin with Thomas, Sarah often thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that terrible spring when fever had stolen her family, through the long, dark summer of grief, to the day she had stumbled into Benjamin's life and he into hers. They had both been broken, both lost, but together they had found a way to heal. Not to forget, never to forget, but to integrate their losses into the people they had become and to build something beautiful from the ruins. Thomas grew into a bright, curious toddler, fearless and energetic. He followed Benjamin everywhere, his chubby legs working hard to keep up with his father's long strides. Sarah would watch them from the kitchen window, her heart full to bursting with love. This was the family she had thought she would never have, the happiness she had believed was lost forever. When Thomas was 2, Sarah became pregnant again. This time the fear was less, though not entirely absent. She had done this before and survived. Benjamin was older too, less terrified though, still vigilant. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Rose after Sarah's lost sister, arrived on a bright autumn morning with far less drama than her brother. She had her mother's auburn hair and green eyes, a beautiful baby who barely cried and seemed content to observe the world with solemn interest. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, named for Sarah's father. He was the image of Sarah, fair-skinned and green-eyed, with a quiet disposition that contrasted sharply with Thomas's boundless energy. Benjamin joked that they were building their own ranch crew, children who would eventually take over the operation. The ranch prospered as Bisbee grew around them. The copper mines brought more people to the territory, and beef prices remained good. Benjamin hired more hands, built additional corrals and a second barn. Sarah's garden expanded, and she sold produce in town, developing a reputation for the best tomatoes and squash in the area. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that felt hard-won and precious. Life was not without its sorrows. Margaret died peacefully in her sleep in 1889, and Sarah mourned the woman who had given her a refuge when she needed it most. Benjamin's father passed the same year, and though their relationship had been strained, Benjamin felt the loss keenly. One of the ranch hands was killed in an accident, trampled by a spooked horse, and the tragedy reminded them all how fragile life could be. But the joys outweighed the sorrows. Thomas grew tall and capable, a natural horseman who could rope a calf by the time he was 8. Emma was gentle and artistic, always drawing or making up stories, her imagination as boundless as the sky. Samuel was serious and thoughtful, interested in the mechanical workings of things, taking apart and reassembling anything he could get his hands on. In the evenings, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Benjamin would sit on the porch as they had during their courtship, watching the sun set over the mountains. They would talk about their day, make plans for the future, or simply sit in comfortable silence, hands linked. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked one evening, a decade into their marriage, marrying someone so broken. Benjamin turned to her, his blue eyes serious. "You were never broken, Sarah. You were wounded, but that is different. And no, I have never regretted a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had never wavered. "I thought I had died in Kansas," she admitted. "I thought the real me had been buried with my family, and I was just a ghost going through the motions. But you saw the person I could become. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself." "We saved each other," Benjamin said simply. "That is what love does. It does not fix broken people, but it gives them a reason to fix themselves." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, as they had sat that night when Benjamin had first said he loved her. The years had added lines to their faces, silver to Benjamin's hair, but their love had only deepened, tempered and strengthened by shared challenges and shared joys. Their children grew, and eventually the question of schooling arose. Bisbee had a proper schoolhouse now, with a trained teacher, but it was 5 miles away. After much discussion, Sarah and Benjamin decided that Thomas and Emma would attend, making the journey each day on horseback once they were old enough. Samuel, still too young, stayed home with Sarah, learning his letters and numbers at the kitchen table. Emma thrived in school, her quick mind and love of stories making her a favorite of the teacher. Thomas was less academic, but excelled at anything physical, impressing his classmates with his skills. Sarah felt a bittersweet ache watching her children go off to school, thinking of her sister Emma, who had wanted so badly to be a teacher. She thought her sister would be proud, both of her namesake and of the life Sarah had built. As the children grew more independent, Sarah found herself with more time. She began working with a group of women in town to establish a small lending library, collecting books and making them available to anyone who wanted to read. It was satisfying work, connecting people with knowledge and stories, and Sarah poured her energy into it. Benjamin supported her endeavors, proud of his wife's initiative. He had long since stopped being surprised by her strength and capability. The timid, grief-stricken woman who had arrived at his ranch so many years ago had blossomed into a confident, purposeful woman who moved through life with grace and determination. In 1892, a traveling photographer came through Bisbee, offering to take family portraits. Sarah convinced Benjamin to have their picture taken, arguing that the children should have something to remember them by. The photographer set up his equipment on the ranch, posing them carefully. Benjamin, standing tall, his hand on Sarah's shoulder as she sat in a chair, their 3 children arranged around them. It took several tries to get Samuel to hold still, but finally the picture was taken. When the photograph was developed and delivered a week later, Sarah stared at it in wonder. Here was undeniable proof of the life they had built. Benjamin strong and weathered, herself smiling gently, and their 3 beautiful children. It seemed impossible that this was her life, that she had gone from such depths of despair to such heights of contentment. She thought of the first day at the ranch when she had told Benjamin she was broken inside and he had promised they would put her back together. He had kept that promise, but not by fixing her. He had given her the space and support to heal herself, had loved her through the process, had shown her that life after loss was not only possible, but could be beautiful. The years continued their steady march. Thomas, at 18, announced his intention to stay on the ranch and learn the business properly from his father. Benjamin was thrilled, and father and son became inseparable, riding out together each morning to check the herd, to mend fences, to handle the 1,000 tasks that ranching required. Emma, at 16, had become a lovely young woman with her mother's gentle nature and her own artistic flair. She had begun keeping a journal, filling pages with her observations and stories. Samuel, at 14, had developed a fascination with the new technologies creeping into the territory. Telegraphs, better mining equipment, even early automobiles he had seen in pictures. Sarah and Benjamin, both in their 40s now, began to think about the future beyond themselves. The ranch was thriving, their children were healthy and happy, and they had built something lasting. On their 15th wedding anniversary, they returned to the canyon where Benjamin had first declared his feelings, spreading a blanket in the same spot. 15 years, Sarah marveled, looking out over the unchanging landscape. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime. A good lifetime, Benjamin said, pulling her close. The best years of my life have been with you. Sarah smiled, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the lines time had etched there. I was so afraid to love you, afraid of losing someone else, afraid of the pain. But you taught me that love is worth the risk, always. We were both afraid, Benjamin reminded her, but we were brave together. They kissed, a kiss that held 15 years of partnership, of passion, of profound affection. When they pulled apart, Sarah rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I want to tell you something, she said quietly. Something I have never said aloud. When I lost my family, I wished I had died too. For months I wanted it. But then I met you, and slowly, so slowly, I began to want to live again. You gave me that, Benjamin. You gave me back my life. Benjamin's arms tightened around her. And you gave me back mine. After Elena and Michael died, I was just going through the motions. But you reminded me what it meant to truly live, to hope, to love. We healed each other, Sarah. That is the gift we gave each other. They stayed at the canyon until sunset, talking and remembering, celebrating the years they had shared and the years still to come. As they drove home in the wagon, the stars emerging overhead, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. She would always carry the losses of her past, would always remember her first family, with love and sorrow. But she had built a new family, a new life, and it was rich and full and deeply good. The 20th century arrived with much fanfare and speculation about what the future might hold. The children were excited by the new era, by the possibilities of progress and change. Benjamin and Sarah were more pragmatic, understanding that some things would change while others remained eternal. The need for food and shelter, the value of hard work, the importance of family, the power of love. Thomas began courting a young woman from town, a rancher's daughter named Catherine, who could ride and rope as well as any man. Sarah liked her immediately, seeing in Catherine the same strength and independence she had cultivated in herself. When Thomas asked for permission to propose, Benjamin gave it gladly, and the wedding was planned for the following spring. Emma had begun submitting her stories to magazines back east, and to everyone's delight, one was accepted for publication. Seeing her daughter's name in print brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She thought of her sister Emma, who had dreamed of teaching, of sharing knowledge and stories with others. Her daughter was doing that in her own way, and Sarah felt her sister's presence strongly in the moment, as if Emma was watching with pride. Samuel announced his intention to go to college in California to study engineering, It was a bold plan, college still being relatively rare, especially in the territories, but Benjamin and Sarah supported it. They had worked hard to give their children opportunities they themselves had never had, and seeing those opportunities realized was its own reward. The ranch continued to prosper, but Benjamin began gradually turning over responsibilities to Thomas, trusting his capable son to make decisions and lead the hired hands. It felt right, this passing of the torch, this continuation of what he and Sarah had built. Their legacy would live on through their children and, eventually, their grandchildren. Thomas and Catherine's wedding in 1901 was a joyful affair, the whole town turning out to celebrate. Sarah watched her son exchange vows and remembered her own wedding day, the hope and love that had suffused that moment. Thomas and Catherine would build their own life, face their own challenges, but they would do it together, and that gave Sarah confidence in their future. A year later, Catherine gave birth to Benjamin and Sarah's first grandchild, a girl they named Margaret after Sarah's cousin. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah felt the circle of life complete itself. From death and loss had come new life, new hope, new love. She thought of all the people who had shaped her journey, her parents and sister, Margaret who had taken her in, and most of all, Benjamin who had shown her how to live again. Emma left for New York City to pursue her writing more seriously. A bold move for a young woman, but one that Sarah and Benjamin supported despite their worries. She wrote home regularly, her letters full of wonder at the bustling city, at the opportunities available to her. Sarah missed her daughter terribly, but was proud of her courage. Samuel departed for California, and the house felt suddenly empty with 2 of their 3 children gone. But Thomas and Catherine had moved into a house on the ranch property, and little Margaret was a frequent visitor, filling the quiet with her laughter. Sarah found she enjoyed being a grandmother, able to spoil the child, and then return her to her parents, relishing the sweetness without the constant responsibility. The years settled into a comfortable rhythm. Benjamin, now in his 50s, still worked the ranch but at a more measured pace, letting Thomas handle the heavy work. Sarah maintained her garden, worked with the lending library, and spent time with her granddaughter. They had become pillars of the community, respected and liked, their love story something of a local legend. In the evenings, they still sat on the porch, still held hands, still marveled at the life they had built from the ashes of their losses. They spoke often of the past now, not with pain, but with gentle nostalgia, remembering both the sorrows and the joys. "Do you think we have done right by them?" Sarah asked one evening, meaning their children. "Have we prepared them for the world?" "I think we have given them love and strength," Benjamin replied. "The rest they will figure out for themselves, just as we did." "We had each other, though," Sarah pointed out. "That made all the difference." "They have each other, too," Benjamin said. "Thomas has Catherine, Emma will find someone when she is ready, and Samuel has time. We taught them how to love by loving each other. That is the greatest gift we could give them." Sarah squeezed his hand, knowing he was right. Their children had grown up watching a marriage built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared purpose. Whatever challenges they faced, they would have that foundation to build upon. In 1905, Emma returned from New York with exciting news. She had fallen in love with a fellow writer, a kind man named Daniel, and they wanted to marry. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Sarah cried happy tears as she watched her daughter pledge her life to a man who clearly adored her. Daniel fit seamlessly into the family, his gentle humor complementing Emma's creative spirit. Samuel graduated from college with honors and took a position with a mining company, using his engineering skills to improve safety and efficiency. He brought his sweetheart, a woman named Alice he had met at school, to meet the family, and she too was welcomed with open arms. The grandchildren multiplied. Thomas and Catherine had 2 more children, boys this time. Emma and Daniel had twins, a boy and a girl. Samuel and Alice, after marrying, had a daughter. The ranch house that had once been so quiet was now filled with life during family gatherings, children running through the rooms where Sarah had once moved like a ghost. Benjamin and Sarah, now in their 60s, found deep satisfaction in watching their family flourish. All 3 of their children had found love, had built families of their own, and were thriving in their chosen paths. It was more than they had dared hope for during those early years when simply surviving the day had been an achievement. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1914, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled every available space, the house bursting with noise and laughter. A feast was prepared, gifts were given, and stories were told. Thomas stood and offered a toast, thanking his parents for showing him what true love looked like. Emma read a piece she had written about her mother's strength and her father's steadiness. Samuel spoke of the values they had instilled in him: hard work, integrity, compassion. Sarah cried through most of it, overwhelmed by the life they had created. When it was her turn to speak, she stood and looked around at all the faces, at the family that had grown from just her and Benjamin into this thriving, loving clan. 30 years ago, she began, her voice shaking with emotion, I came to Arizona broken and lost. I had given up on happiness, on love, on the future. And then I met your father, and he showed me that broken things can be mended, that grief does not have to be the end of the story. Everything you see here, all of you, came from that chance meeting, from the choice we made to heal together, to love despite our losses. You are all proof that from tremendous pain can come tremendous joy. Never forget that. Benjamin stood and wrapped his arms around her as their family applauded. He whispered in her ear, We did it. We built something beautiful. We did, Sarah agreed, looking out at the faces of their children and grandchildren. We really did. The party continued long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. The younger grandchildren eventually fell asleep in various corners, worn out by excitement. Sarah held her newest grandchild, Samuel's daughter Rose, and marveled at the tiny perfection of her. This child would never know the Sarah who had arrived in Bisbee hollow-eyed and defeated. She would only know her grandmother as a strong, loving woman, and that felt like its own kind of victory. As the family departed over the next few days, returning to their various homes and lives, Benjamin and Sarah were left alone once more. The house felt quiet, but not empty, filled with the echoes of laughter and love. They returned to their evening ritual, sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Sarah's hair was silver now, Benjamin's face deeply lined, but their hands fit together as perfectly as they had 30 years before. It has been a good life, Benjamin said quietly, better than I ever imagined. It has, Sarah agreed. You know what I realized today? I have been happy longer than I was, sad. The years of grief and loss, they were terrible, but they were brief compared to all the years of love and joy that came after. The balance tipped Benjamin. Happiness won. Benjamin pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Happiness won because we fought for it, because we did not give up on each other or ourselves. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, as they had done countless times over the decades. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a farm in Kansas to a ranch in Arizona, from the depths of despair to the heights of contentment. She thought about her first family, whose love had shaped her into the woman who could survive their loss. She thought about Benjamin, whose patient love had shown her how to live again. And she thought about their children and grandchildren, the legacy of their love made manifest. Do you remember, Sarah said softly, that first day I came to your ranch, when I told you I was broken inside? I remember, Benjamin replied. I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met, still standing despite everything trying to knock you down. You said we would put me back together, Sarah continued. And we did, but it was not like repairing a broken plate, trying to hide the cracks. It was more like creating a mosaic, taking all the broken pieces and arranging them into something new and beautiful. The cracks are still there, the scars remain, but they are part of the pattern now, part of what makes me who I am. Benjamin nodded slowly. That is a good way to put it. We are both mosaics, made from broken pieces, but beautiful because of it, not despite it. I love you, Sarah said, the words as true now as they had been 30 years ago, perhaps even more so for being weathered by time and trial. Thank you for finding me when I was lost. Thank you for letting me, Benjamin replied. Thank you for being brave enough to heal, to love again, to build this life with me. They stayed on the porch long after full dark, wrapped in blankets against the cool desert night, content simply to be together. Two people who had been shattered by loss, who had found each other in the wasteland of grief, who had chosen to heal and to love and to build something lasting. Their story was not one of miraculous salvation or love conquering all in some easy, magical way. It was a story of hard work and patience, of choosing each day to move forward, of supporting each other through darkness until light gradually returned. As they finally went inside to bed, walking slowly with the careful steps of age, Sarah paused at the doorway to look back at the ranch spread out under the stars. This was home, built on love and loss and hope. This was the life she had never thought she would have, the happiness she had believed impossible. And it was real, solid, hers. Benjamin followed her gaze, understanding without words. He took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice, and led her inside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, the everyday business of living. But tonight, they had each other, and that had always been enough. In the bedroom they had shared for 3 decades, they prepared for sleep with the comfortable routine of long marriage. Sarah brushed out her silver hair, while Benjamin closed the curtains. They climbed into bed, the same bed where they had loved and laughed and sometimes cried, where their intimacy had deepened from tentative exploration to profound connection. Benjamin pulled Sarah close, and she settled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. This simple act of closeness, of falling asleep in each other's arms, had become perhaps the most sacred ritual of their marriage. It was both ordinary and profound, a nightly reminder that they had each other, that they were not alone. "Good night, my love," Benjamin whispered into her hair. "Good night," Sarah replied, her voice already drowsy with approaching sleep. They drifted off together, 2 hearts beating in quiet harmony, 2 souls that had found each other in the darkness and had chosen, day after day, year after year, to walk toward the light together. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, the stars wheeling overhead in their eternal dance. Inside, Sarah and Benjamin slept peacefully, their journey from brokenness to wholeness complete. Their love, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the transformative power of choosing to heal, to hope, and to love again.